Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Classic Gamers Guild podcast. I'm not sure if my addressing you qualifies as breaking the fourth wall, but this is the only way I could find to segue into the topic of breaking the fourth wall, which is what we're talking about today, breaking fourth walls.
I think we've already beat it to death.
I'm done with this episode. Actually, no, this is just the start. Okay, now we have to actually say stuff. Okay, so, Paul, you and I do not always see eye to eye on fourth wall breaks and things that break them.
Yes, this is correct. And you saying that has just now reminded me of that. I was going into this with anticipation as to whether or not what side you were going to favor on for this conversation. Then it all just flooded back to me in our talks about Thimbleweed Park and such. So yeah, this should be fun because I still maintain my ground on finding it acceptable, if not pleasurable, which kind of oddly sexualizes it. That was a weird choice of words. Sorry.
Wow, that was that was special. Moving on. I don't know. As with a lot of things, there's always exceptions. So there are fourth wall breaks that I don't mind. And so I was trying to figure out what is the line between what is fourth wall breaking that I like versus fourth wall breaking that I don't like. Now, first of all, I think it's probably very important to distinguish between meta humor versus fourth wall breaking. So meta humor is just anything that might make you more aware of the fact that you are playing a game, or, depending on the medium, a movie that kind of reminds you that you're watching a movie would be meta. Whether or not it's funny, that will determine if it's humor, or intended anyways. But that can actually still be done in universe and in character, whereas fourth wall breaking is deliberately breaking the fourth wall, which is the wall that exists directly between you and basically it's the screen. It's basically the easiest way to say it. The screen is the fourth wall. So if somebody actually turns to the screen and talks to you as the player/viewer, that is fourth wall break. That's why I wasn't too sure about the intro, because we're a podcast. We don't really have very many walls to begin with. Do we even have 4? Can we break a fourth wall?
I think because it's audible, it's maybe 3, but we are breaking that third one. Hey, you guys listening right now, hi. There, now we definitely officially broke that third and or fourth wall.
There are walls broken there, I think. But yeah, I was thinking about fourth wall breaks, and especially when it came to Thimbleweed Park, because I had gotten about halfway into that game before I lost my progress, and therefore I decided to just spoil it for myself. And it turns out that basically the ending wasn't too spoiled for me, because I basically predicted what the ending was going to be. For those of you who do not know the ending of Thimbleweed Park, we are going to be discussing it quite a bit, so this is your spoiler warning. And if you have any intention of playing that game through to completion, just know that it's a great game and you should play it to completion. So even if I do take a little bit of a negative stance towards the game, don't get me wrong, it's a great game. You should play it. You should buy it. Full price. It's worth it. But I don't like the fourth wall breaks in this game. And even though the ending tries to justify it, I don't think it makes it any better for me, because I actually thought about this just before recording, how I should, how to define my stance on Thimbleweed Park, and I thought I did not like the fourth wall breaking where the characters refer to the game as being a game. Entirely. They will talk to you saying, oh, make sure you save your game every once in a while. And as annoying as that was, I would actually have rather just endured the fact that this was just humor that I didn't like, rather than them basing the entire premise of the game around the fact that it's a game, and therefore that's why everything is fourth wall breaking, because everything is meta, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, well, that weakened the story by doing that. Whereas if you just played that off as a joke that some people may or may not like, I don't know. I just thought that it was a lot more interesting, the story, without turning it we're a video game that's why we're going to talk in video game terms.
All right, so I understand where you're coming from completely. I mean, that makes sense, especially if you're kind of predisposed to not liking breaking the fourth wall. I looked at it as the ending sort of justified the amount of fourth wall breaks in the game, but at the same time, it also kind of doubles down on it and some, kind of making the entire experience based around it. So, while I enjoyed it, I can't explain to you why you should have, because if you don't like fourth wall breaking, then this game is putting it on parade, quite literally. What I liked about how they went about it, because, well, let me back up. Two games that come to mind pre Thimbleweed Park as far as fourth wall breaking and a person that's basically mostly centered around adventure games would be Monkey Island.
Yeah.
I suppose you could say both of them. And then Indiana Jones, probably both of them as well, but especially Last Crusade. So when Thimbleweed Park started doing the fourth wall breaking, I didn't mind it. One, because I don't mind as much, let's say, as you or a lot of people. But also it was reminding me of, the other Winnick and Gilbert creations of the past. So I just figured that's, they're just doing their thing. And then it did kind of get, I don't want to say a bit much, because at no point did I stop enjoying it, but it started, just happening a lot. And I honestly, that didn't spoil the ending for me. I think myself, one of our mutual friends, I think it was Jamie, I'm not sure, probably helped kind of construct your creation of an accurate ending of the game by saying every time you'd kind of complain to one of us off air, obviously, about how much fourth wall breaking is, we'd both be like, look, I can't tell you why they're doing it because I'll spoil the ending.
Which spoiled the ending.
Right, exactly. It's I'm like, every time I say that, I'm planting little seeds that fourth wall has something to do with the ending. But what I was going to say is that the reason it enhanced the story for me, as opposed to, as in your wording, kind of just doubled down on something that you didn't enjoy, why it enhanced the game for me was, to those who aren't aware, the game kind of starts out with, it seems like it's going to just be a murder mystery. There's a dead German fellow in a lake, and you play a couple of people, but two agents show up to investigate it. But then what they start doing, which I loved, in kind of a Twin Peaks sort of fashion, J.J. Abrams style thing, they started just throwing in these odd scenes. Like a reoccurring one was that you were being watched on, like, a fuzzy channel 2 sort of antenna, and and the characters would say other things. One of the agents would say, like, I've got to finish up this case so I can do what I'm really here to do. And I loved how
that's perfect though. That's perfect though. That's not fourth wall breaking. Sorry,
No,
I'm interrupting. I'm probably preventing you from actually reaching your point. But the moments that got me weren't those, because those, if they had just stuck with that style, that would have been perfect. Even given the ending, and the ending would have been so much more powerful as a result. But it's the little moments like when, and I've already forgotten their characters' names, but right at the beginning, you find out that the character is like stabbed to death, like the victim. And then the character says, like, stabbed, but I thought on the title screen there was a bullet hole on the sign. I'm like, okay, well, that's just not something you're supposed to say.
That's actually, I've totally forgot about that. I remember it now that you say it. Yeah, you're right. They were kind of, well, I guess to tie into to the point I was making too, as far as the stabbing versus bullet shooting, is the game takes pleasure in kind of fucking with you. And I thought that really actually helped build mystery around it. Whereas I understand that position specifically it could be polarizing. Like it's not everyone's going to look at it as like that's enhancing the story. It could just be confusing, frustrating, or unnecessary to a lot of people, which I would also understand. But to me, it's I looked at the game. I guess what I'm trying to say is it as like a murder mystery until they started dropping these weird little lines in there. And it made me doubt why I was here as a character, let's say, or why I was playing the game as me. And so that's why I really enjoyed the ending, because I was like, this, it just really slowly derails from a murder mystery and turns into something else. And what the something else was, to me, justified the fourth wall breaking, where it was, I guess we already said no spoilers. So going forward, it's, the game has full self-awareness by the ending. It is completely more than, it's more, even, I don't want to say more than fourth wall breaking, but it just doubles down and says, we're self-aware to the point that your character is going to learn that it's been in a game the whole time.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is they once they started it, they really finished it, and that's what I liked.
Well, and again, like I said, some of the examples that you gave before, that's fine. And if that's the way they wanted to take the story, that's fine. I personally would have just preferred if it was a murder mystery, personally. But if they're going to go into the whole, oh, well, this is actually a video game, they could have done that a lot and still avoided a lot of the stupid, or what I consider to be stupid humor, fourth wall breaks. Like there's characters at the very beginning who are like, oh, don't forget to save your game. Oh, should I save the game because I'm going to die? No, we're not one of those games where you die or get stuck, because those are stupid games. It's like, okay, just shut up, will you? Just let me do this. They didn't need to throw in this stuff like that. That's the kind of thing that I don't like. Like there's alluding to the fact that it is a game, that isn't fourth wall breaking to me. Fourth wall is, and there's obviously a lot of little tropes, which technically can count as fourth wall breaking, like especially in a lot of these point and click adventures where you click on something and the character will either turn to you or just generally stand there and say, oh, well, I can't do that, or oh, it doesn't move, or you see them talking and they're talking to you as the player. But that's, it is a fourth wall break, but that's still very much keeping you inside. Like that's not jarring. That's just sort of like the character telling you, oh, I can't do that right now, or oh, this is something that blah blah blah. Those are fine. Sometimes it can get really ham-handed, or sometimes it's just sort of weird. Like there's a few games, especially when I play certain computer RPGs. I think it happened maybe in Baldur's Gate, but especially happened in Neverwinter Nights, where you go through a tutorial, or even just like the start of the game, and these characters who, it's not even a joke, it's not even any sort of deliberate fourth wall break, but they'll say like, okay, so if you want to attack that person, press A and click on them. It's like, why did you say that to me? You can't you couldn't have just said like, go attack that person, and then in parentheses or some sort of like a dialogue box say, in order to attack, do this. They spoke in character as if I was to talk to you. It's like, hey, want to go fight that guy? Okay, first of all, you just got to press the P button. It's like, what the hell are you talking about? It's like, okay, then you double click on him. Like, what? And it's things like that where it's not even meta humor. And I'll get to that in a second, because, there are some games that try to subvert that. But, it takes you out of the experience. And that's when I think breaking the fourth wall sucks, because there are times when you can break the fourth wall and still keep you in. And there are times where it just takes me right out. There are some other games, like more JRPGs. I forget which ones they were, but I've played a couple where they tried to subvert that by a character saying to you in character, oh, in order to do something, press the A button. And the character is sort of like, says exactly like, oh, what are you talking about? What A button? What's an A button? It's like, oh, see, and now you got to use the directional pad. You're like, what the hell? What do you mean directional pad? Why don't I just walk there? That sort of thing. But again, it's the thing with fourth wall breaks is that the humor doesn't last to me. If it's going to get any humorous reaction out of me at all, like if I enjoy the joke in the slightest bit, it'll be like once and then never again. It's already old and tired and I know the joke. So already I've seen like a couple of games do the whole like, oh, what do you mean B button? What are you talking about? And already by the second time I saw it, I was sort of like, well, now I'm just tired of that too.
Right, right, yeah. No, and that makes sense too. I could say you helped me understand, I think, why part of why I don't mind as much being mostly centric again around adventure games is what you said a few moments ago. They kind of inherently not really break the fourth wall, because it's a part of the construction of adventure games to talk to you, as you alluded to. Like, what's a good example? If you if you're really trying to do something and you keep clicking on it a lot, most adventure games at some point will say to you in dialogue that fits the character, not looking at the screen. Kind of, it doesn't break the fourth wall, just removes one brick out of the wall to say like, hey, maybe you should try this instead, as they see you just getting stuck. So it seems like adventure games often kind of talk to the player particularly when they're stuck. And again, that not to be mistaken for actual fourth wall breaking, but
Exactly.
it does make it to where when an adventure game, and looking away from Thimbleweed Park, which does it, a lot. Looking at maybe Indiana Jones or something like that, the 2-3 times in the Last Crusade that they looked at the camera and said something, it was such a little amount and such a large game that for an adventure game to go from, hey, you should try this instead, to the character looking at you and making a joke, it bridges it. It kind of bridges that gap, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it makes it more palatable. And then as to the replay value, I ain't really thought too much about that, but I could see it being, as in the example you gave in a JRPG, for example, I could see, that being frustrating. Whereas an adventure game, some of them do have replayability, and that's an important characteristic to have. But I think with adventure games, I'll speak for myself. If I'm going to replay it, it'll probably take 5 to 15 years before I replay it. Because adventure games,
That's
it's
true.
Like this 5-hour journey. You don't want to just go back and do it again. There's no, no, like mechanics or whatever. It's mostly walking through a book, right? So I guess, again, coming from the adventure side of things, that's probably why I don't mind it as well, because it's like, replayability. I'll probably find that funny again in 10 years.
Yeah.
Where, as a JRPG, I would hate to have that shoved in my face every time, so I get that too.
The more I say this, more I think about this, and more I worry about the pedantic police out there. I'm going to guess that someone's going to probably say that fourth wall break actually, I'm very, very much blurring the lines of what a fourth wall break is. And technically, fourth wall break is only when the character directly speaks to the viewer / player. So I'm going to guess, I didn't even think about that before, but I'm going to guess that that's actually probably some sort of semantic restriction, that fourth wall breaking is only when somebody talks directly to me. So maybe like, oh, because the characters were talking to each other about saving the game, maybe that's not technically a fourth wall break. So, okay, I'm willing to concede maybe my semantic terminology is not on point here, but the concepts are what I'm trying to get at. There's a certain ham-fistedness of making us aware that you're a game and addressing yourself as a game versus just throwing in Easter eggs. Like Secret of Monkey Island, there's a poster for Loom somewhere in there, and that's like anachronistic to say the least. But I thought that was kind of funny, as opposed to just sort of like if Guybrush were to look at that and be like, oh, hey, that's a game you should play next, kind of thing, right?
I'm certainly not one to really split hairs on what is or what isn't. I know you're saying that for anyone out there that might be, but yeah, for me, it's any communication from the game to me. I personally would consider it, albeit in blurred lines. But one thing about fourth wall breaking, I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on, since you have a contrasting opinion, is what I heard so many people mention. I was actually a bit surprised when I started Googling around for more examples of perhaps games I hadn't played that done it. I was really surprised, maybe ignorantly, how many people don't like it. There's a lot of articles out there like, please stop doing this in any game ever, from like Kotaku, things like that. So it's definitely, I think you're on the favorable side of history when it comes to your opinion. But that being said, the biggest argument is of course immersion, and
yes.
Let me put it this way, and again, I hate beating this to death. It's like the fourth time I'm going to say it, but being centric around adventure games, I'm just saying it so anyone listening can really understand where I'm coming from, my opinion, because this subject is, I think, unique in that genre to the rest of them. A lot of it, as you alluded to, is because of replayability. But with adventure games, I just don't feel that fourth wall breaking takes me out of the game. I feel like the whole game is kind of a dance with the developers, with the characters more appropriately, kind of back and forth. And I don't feel... I've never really felt like the characters as much as maybe an open world game like Red Dead Redemption's the last one I played, so I'll reference that. But in Grand Theft, any game you want to put in this place for your imagination, go ahead. In that game, I could see it being well annoying because there's not a whole lot of dialogue. Most of the dialogue's in cutscenes and things like that, so it's real easy to feel like the character in those games. Whereas adventure games are so kind of direct line thinking that for me, it's never bothered me, except for this just came to mind. In Last Crusade, there's this one scene where they're in Venice, and Brody walks onto the screen in a repeat of a previous joke, walks on the screen soaking wet, And Indy's like, "What happened to you?" And Brody looks dead in the camera and says, "It's a long story." And I've even looked it up or heard someone else say it in a video. I'm not alone, I don't believe, in wondering where the fuck that comes from. Like he looks at you like, it's a long story, wink, wink, and you're like, no, what's the story? Like, why the fuck are you wet? You never got wet in the movie, and this has nothing to do with the game. It's a really weird, confusing moment that actually did take me out of the game a little bit, and it only did so. It didn't do so because he was talking to me, or else I'd be hypocritical in my stance. It took me out of the game just because it made me stop thinking about the game and start wondering what the fuck he was talking about. So,
Right.
I found that to be strange, but I wanted to, long story short, wanted to get your views on Immersion, because to me, it just,
Well,
I don't know. I don't ever get that into a game. Let's see, that came out wrong.
no, no,
I'm never
I know
lost.
what you mean.
Go ahead.
I know
Go
what
ahead,
you
mate.
mean. And immersion is definitely the center of this all. To the fact that, like I said, I think I might have used fourth wall as a misnomer, and I think maybe we should have come out talking about this as immersion breaking more than fourth wall. So for everyone who was, no one ever writes to us. Come on, who am I saying? What am I saying? It's no one ever writes to us, so no one's even going to complain if they do catch that. But for the record, I am officially changing the terminology. Thank you for coming up with it. It's not fourth wall breaking necessarily, because as I'm trying to get to, is that there is ways to break the fourth wall without breaking immersion. I've mentioned one of those already, where the character tells you just like they can't do something, right? Especially in LucasArts games, you try to pick up a book, and maybe Indy or Dave or Guybrush or Bobbin will say, "Oh, I can't get that." That's technically breaking the fourth wall, but in a way that I don't even notice. I don't like you do specifically. The character talks to me as the player, and that is a break. But I'm totally in it. That's not. That's a sort of like an aside that the character says to you. That's fine, and that keeps me in. A lot of narration just happens, and that's technically fourth wall breaking, because the narrator is relaying from the game to you. Okay, that's nothing wrong with that. But then you get the games that are sort of like, hey, you can't do this in a game, or hey, we are better than those other games that you would be playing right now. It's just like, okay, that's breaking the immersion, right? That's you're pushing me out of the game rather than pulling me in.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because that one spot, there's a refrigerator or some shit in the kitchen where Dolores breaks glass, and he's like, if this was I think did he say Sierra? I guess not, probably not, to be safe. But yeah, there's some other company, the other company.
No, I think they actually specifically call out Sierra. I think they say it by name,
right? Because they make it really apparent it's Sierra. All right, yeah, and he's like, if this was a Sierra Online game, then you would have died from blood loss or whatever. And to me, I can acknowledge that was a bit much, but at the same time, when I played it, I did give it a cheap laugh. Like I was like, heh. One of those. So I can't really knock it, because it did get the cheap laugh out of me, but I know that one point broke a lot of people.
I'm not even offended as a Sierra fan.
Right.
It's more just sort of like, oh, for crying out loud, come on.
Right, yeah, because same here. We both, I think, are a bit 60-40 on the Sierra side, and yeah, it wasn't an offensive thing. It was more just like, all right, this is a lot of breaking the fourth wall here.
Yeah.
But back to, I guess, while we're temporarily back on Thimbleweed Park, with the immersion thing, I was going to add, besides it being a bit of a kind of an antiquated sort of thing from LucasArts games, the minor fourth wall breaking, so there was that would help me understand why they were doing it, but also I think, as I'm kind of over analyzing this, the fact that you switch between characters, and there's a lot of characters to switch between in Thimbleweed Park, I never really felt like I was one character, as opposed to, for example, Police Quest, where about halfway through, I'm probably starting to feel like Sunny, and so on and so forth, as much as you can with an adventure game. Whereas Thimbleweed Park, I never really felt like one of the characters. I kind of just felt like I was toying with them. So for them to play back, if you will, to tease me back, that's why I think it worked for me. But I often marvel at the immersion thing. It makes me feel like I'm missing out on the game playing or movie going experience, because and I know I'm not unique in what I'm about to say, but like I feel like I just come in and out of immersion because I might see a scene in a great action film that makes me wonder how they did that scene.
Right.
You know, and you coming from a theater background, you know, dealing with you know, well, again, just theater, cinema, etc. You know, you know how a lot of these things work, like lighting and things like that. So I'd imagine you go through that too sometimes, where you see a scene, you're just like, God, how did they, you know, how'd they build that set, or how they, you know, how'd they do that lighting like that? And then I go, you know, back into the story of the movie. It's just a quick footnote thought I put in my brain and move on.
Exactly.
And it doesn't ruin the immersion. And that might happen like 20 times in a film or a game where I stop to wonder how they done something. So the immersion thing for me, what I'm trying to say is that I break out of that immersion all the time in wonderful games and movies that I love. And so therefore it doesn't give me a negative experience.
And again, for me personally, I don't consider that to be a break of immersion, because you are, even if you do kind of think about it as a movie or video game or something like that, it does keep you absorbed into it. Me. So,
Right.
So, you know, and I see your point though. I could see how the argument can be made that that is immersion breaking if you're so good that you have to step back and appreciate it. But, so again, technically, maybe you have a point, if you want to get technical, but I don't
if
consider...
you want to be a dick about it.
No, I didn't mean it quite like that, but it's kind of true. But I just mean like, yeah, I don't find that takes me out. I think that says kind of like, sometimes somebody will say something, and especially in movies, we'll use this as a sort of an easier example, because I can think of several, I can't think of specific examples, but I know that it's happened quite a few times where something will reference another movie, and I'll just have that aha moment of like, oh, that was from this, or that referenced this, or that's very similar to this scene from this movie. But again, it doesn't break my immersion from it unless it's done really horribly. There are times when they do that, and it is really bad to the point that it breaks my immersion.
Right, and I think a lot of times, especially on my end, the movie or game doesn't even ask for it or do anything. Like any scene, and let's again stick with movies for correlation or to try and explain this better. But in a movie, in a scene that doesn't have, let's say, like an Easter egg, as you kind of alluded to or whatever, it doesn't do anything but just continue on with the movie. I might stop and be like, is that CGI or a puppet? Yeah. Or, you know, I don't know, just weird little quirky things where you might even stop and wonder what the actor was thinking in that scene because his face was weird. You know, just all these little things, again, kind of pointing to your background with theater and things like that. It's like, once you know how these things work, you know, sometimes it's hard to ignore it. Like for me on the musical score side, you know, listening to certain things, I can't help but take a quick moment to pick it apart for a second and then go back to the film. So I guess what I'm trying to say is a lot of times in movies, they don't even try. It's not even an Easter egg. It's not their fault. But you know, it'll still do that to me. And probably the same with games too. I might step into a new scene with this brilliant background and just stop and wonder like, oh, I wonder if that was hand drawn or, so anyway, my general point is I'm not sure I'm ever immersed enough for fourth wall breaking to piss me off. But I will add one more thing, diverting from that just a little bit, that I thought of a few moments ago was, again, in Thimbleweed Park, odd, you know, delivery of it. You know, they give you so much of it, and for me to kind of explain why it worked for me, I kind of alluded back to the film Deadpool, which I'm sure most of you out there have seen it, or at least heard about how many times.
Which I'll just throw in for 1 second. This is a very good example of when fourth wall breaking actually is good and works, and I do enjoy. So I'm not like I'm always against fourth wall breaking. If it's done well, I can enjoy it, and Deadpool is a very good example of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that made a believer out of even the harshest critics, because he does such a good job of it. But the correlation, I guess, between that and Thimbleweed Park was like, they kind of start the game / movie off with fourth wall breaking, and they never let up. They're pretty relentless about it, and to the point where, sticking with Deadpool, it becomes part of the film. It's part of it. It basically is its comedy. You know, it leans very heavily on it. So to me, it's almost, and maybe this is to get your thoughts on too, is what about when a game or movie makes it a part of their formula? You know, does that change the immersion rule?
The thing about Deadpool, when I watched it was I was 100% okay with the fourth wall breaking because I knew that was his character and it has been for as long as Deadpool has existed. So I knew that's what Deadpool does. That's what he is. If it had just been like, you know, Captain New Hero in a totally original movie that was made 2 years ago, I probably would not have liked it, even if it was the exact same movie. Or there would have been some definitely very good, redeeming qualities of it, because it is just a very charming movie in general. But the fourth wall breaking, I would just been like, oh, really? Fourth wall breaking? This is a little bit much. But because I knew that's what Deadpool is, I knew that was part and parcel to why I'm watching this movie to begin with. In terms of examples in which I like fourth wall breaking, I mean, this is not a perfect example because I do have some issues with the direction that this game went, but at the same time, it's a game I enjoyed quite a bit. I just wish it had gone in one direction, it went in another, but granted, the direction that it decided to go, they did it really well. I'm not going to say very much about it because I really want you to play it and you haven't yet, but Doki Doki Literature Club, you need to play that one. Again, doesn't take long. It's not even that much of a game, but it does. Granted that it decided to go the fourth wall breaking route, I thought it did it really well, and I do actually really quite enjoy that game.
When it's a permanent fixture in the game or movie's mechanic, as with Thimbleweed Deadpool, then I think it's like, okay, well, this is that kind of story. Whereas a game like Indiana, for example, Monkey Island is just quite silly, so it can be forgiven. Where Indiana could go either way. In a game like that, when it's like, you've been through like a third of the game, and it's just been a normal dialogue, normal narrative, and then all of a sudden they break the fourth wall. I think it's a little shocking and strange. So I guess all I'm trying to say is I think I prefer it when it's more permanent as opposed to transitory.
Okay, actually, you touched on something which I think kind of, and again, everything is just sweeping generalizations. There's exceptions to everything, but I think it worked in Monkey Island because that was just a silly game for me. It just there was a lot of things that they could do that would not jar me because it's Monkey Island, right?
Right.
There's posters for other games in a pirate setting, and there's things like there's all these little things that just sort of make it just something not to take seriously. Whereas Thimbleweed Park, I think it was as humor as it was. A lot of the humor was pretty dry, but also a little bit of a more serious tone. Like it was kind of like a almost Lynchian murder mystery kind of thing. And I think that's why it kind of jarred me a little bit more, that these characters are sort of like, oh, don't forget to save your game. Oh, we're not one of those games where you can die all the time. It's like, okay, that's just, the tone wasn't there to justify it for me.
Right. I could totally see that.
Yeah. It wasn't about the volume of the occurrences. It was more just like, okay, I'm trying to get into this and you keep pulling me out. Whereas in Monkey Island, getting into it is that you are accepting all of the silly quirks of the game.
Right. Yeah, see, I think this is where we agree. I would say when it comes to fourth wall break, well, agree and disagree. When it comes to fourth wall breaking, I'd rather it be an established thing kind of from the beginning and stays rather consistent throughout. Like Thimbleweed, in my opinion, and like Deadpool, where it's just a part of this particular story that you're playing. Mm-hmm. I think it should be that or almost or nothing. It should be that or just meta, as you said. Like what I don't like really is like in Indiana when he just stops and just looks at the camera kind of out of nowhere, and you're just like, what? Like that's a bit jarring. So I guess what I'm trying to say is my final kind of analysis or breakdown on what makes me tick with this immersion breaking is, if you're gonna do it, then start off doing it and keep it consistent, own it. But if you're not gonna just like really have fun with it and own it like that, then don't just throw it in twice in the game, because that's really weird to me.
I just think less is more. I mean, again, like I said, it depends. Deadpool, yeah. Monkey Island, yeah. Thimbleweed Park, I really wish they didn't do that. So,
right. Yeah.
But yeah, that's pretty much. I don't think I'm really going to budge on that too much, because, like I said, I understand how they tried to justify it, and it didn't really help me. I think that there's just ways to do it, and there's ways that are ham-fisted, and there are ways that are just a little bit more cleverly integrated. And, it comes down to immersion when things are integrated, like um, the fourth wall breaks are very integrated into design, like Deadpool. I know they tried to integrate the fourth wall breaking into Thimbleweed Park, and it just didn't work for me.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Let me ask you a quick question. So let's pretend that Thimbleweed Park didn't break the fourth wall any more than, let's say, Monkey Island. Like, if they took it down several notches, for argument's sake, let's just say they didn't, but the ending remained the same. What would you felt about the story in that?
100% better.
Right.
Like you already mentioned that there are some little moments of foreshadowing, and that's all really awesome, and that they could have kept that. They could have done that and not had all the stupid, like, oh, we're not like Sierra Online. Oh, how come it was a gunshot on the title screen and stuff like that? They don't need to throw that. I mean, the characters, as far as I know, don't really know that they're in a video game at the beginning, right?
Not at all, right? Yeah,
right.
Not until the
so
very
then
end.
Why would the character acknowledge that they're in a video game?
Right. No, that's true. That's true. I agree. That's a bit of a little bit of a blip. It's in other words, I could explain it in a very geeky, I'm just trying to make it work now sort of way. and in doing so, I would basically say that until the end, they didn't know that they were pre-programmed to do whatever the dev said to do. There's always a way to slide out of an argument like that, but ultimately you are right. I mean, I think it's more obvious your point than mine as to them knowingly saying fourth wall breaking things, but not knowing that they're a game character until the end. But anyway, full circles. I was curious your opinion on that because I thought the twist, if you will, was really a really cool kind of fresh thing. There's no other game that I know of that's done it. I'm sure it's not the only one, but I thought it was really cool.
It could have worked. I mean, like, I definitely wouldn't have complained so much about, like I said, I would have preferred if it was just a straight up murder mystery.
Right.
But granted, okay, I'm not going to tell them what story they wanted to tell. This is a story they wanted to tell. Fine, that's great. But just they could have also done it better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also agree with the things like the Sierra thing and the saving the game, like those. That's not necessarily my style. I don't necessarily mind the talking to the screen. Again, they've established it and they've been doing it, so I get used to it quickly, and I'm like, cool. But yeah, it just get a bit obnoxious at certain points. I can agree.
There are plenty of games out there that break the fourth wall very famously. Very many of them I have not played, so I didn't feel the authority to bring them up or talk about them. So this is more, as you know, because you just listened to the whole damn thing. This is more about general opinions, and as they relate to Thimbleweed Park, there's a lot of games that I admit I have not played, or just I didn't find the opportunity to bring it up in this particular conversation, and there you go. So, yes.
Actually, that's probably a good ending right there, right before I started talking.